Section 1 of Married Love. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Married Love by Marie Stopes. Section 1. Preface by Dr. Jessie Murray and letter from Professor Starling. Preface by Miss Jessie Murray, M.B., B.S. In this little book, Dr. Marie Stopes deals with subjects which are generally regarded as too sacred for an entirely frank treatment. Some earnest and delicate minds may feel apprehensive that such frankness in details is dangerous, because the effect on prurient minds might be to give them food for their morbid fancies. It is just such a fear which has been largely responsible for the silence and mystery which have for so long been wrapped around the sacred rites of mating. The question now is, has this reticence been carried too far? Has it been carried so far that it now tends to defeat its purpose of safeguarding public morals? There are many who unhesitatingly answer such questions in the affirmative. Their intimate knowledge of human lives compels them to recognize that at least as much harm is done by silence as by speaking out. Everything depends on how the matter is presented. Those who are shocked at the publication of such a book as this, on the ground that it gives material for impure minds to sport with, need only reflect that such material is already amply provided in certain comic papers, in hosts of inferior novels, too often on the stage and film, and presented thus in coarse and demoralizing guise. It can do nothing but good to such minds to meet the facts they are already so familiar with in a totally new light. On the other hand, there are all the earnest and noble young minds who seek to know what responsibilities they are taking on themselves when they marry, and how they may best meet these responsibilities. How few of them have more than the vaguest idea on the subject. How few of them know how or where to obtain the help they desire. They recoil from the coarse and impure sources of information which are so accessible, and they hesitate to approach those they have learned to regard as virtuous and modest, realizing that from such they will receive so little actual information, and that so veiled as to be almost useless. Dr. Stopes has attempted to meet the need of such seekers, and her book will certainly be warmly welcomed by them. It is calculated to prevent many of those mistakes which wreck the happiness of countless lovers as soon as they are actually married. If it did no more than this, it would be valuable indeed. But there is an even more important aspect to be considered: the effect on the child. In all civilized lands, there is a growing sense of responsibility toward the young. The problems of their physical and mental nurture attract more and more attention day by day. Eugenists, educationists, physicians, politicians, philanthropists, and even ordinary parents discuss and ponder and discuss matters both great and small, which have a bearing on the development of the child. By common consent, the first 7 years of life are regarded as the most critical. It is during these years that the foundations of the personality to be are laid, well and truly, or otherwise. It is during these years that the deepest and most ineradicable impressions are made in the plastic constitution of the child, arresting or developing this or the other instinctive trend and fixing it, often for life. And it is during these years, above all, that the parents play the most important role in the inner history of the child's life, not so much by anything they directly teach through verbal exhortations, warnings, or commands, as by those subtler influences which are conveyed in gesture, tone, and facial expression. The younger the child, the more it is influenced through these more primitive modes of expression, and quite as much when they are not directed toward itself, but are employed by the parents in their intimate relations with one another in the presence of their apparently unobserving child. The infant in its cot, the toddling baby by the hearth, the little child to all appearance absorbed in its picture book or toy. Is it not of the utmost importance that these earliest impressions should be of the finest nature? And should we not therefore welcome all that may help, as this book can, to make the living cradle of the next generation as full of beauty and harmony as love and mutual understanding can? The age-long conflict between lower and the higher impulses, between the primitive animal nature and the specifically human developments of an altruistic and ethical order, are fought afresh in each soul and in every marriage. We need to realize more clearly that the lower is never ought to be, eliminated, but rather subsumed by the higher. No true harmony can be hoped for so long as one factor or the other is ignored or repressed. Dr. Stopes makes some very important biological suggestions which should not be lightly dismissed. Further observation is required to establish or disprove her theory of the normal sexual cycle in women, but my own observation certainly tends to confirm it. J. M. Murray. Letter from Professor E. H. Starling, M.D., B.S., F.R.S., Professor of Physiology, University of London. University College, Gower Street, London, W.C., November 23, 1917. Dear Dr. Stopes, the need of such guidance as you give is very evident. After all, instinct in man is all insufficient to determine social behavior, and there is need of instruction in the highest of physiological functions, that of reproduction, as there is in the lower functions of eating and drinking. The only difference being that in the former, instruction can be deferred to a later age. And there is no doubt that in this case it is better to acquire knowledge by instruction than by a type of experience which is nearly always sordid and may be fraught with danger to the health of the individual and of the family. At the present time, it is of vital importance to the state that its marriages should be fruitful, in children, happiness, and efficiency, and all three are closely connected. If your book helps in securing this object, your trouble will not have been in vain. Believe me, yours very truly.
Section 2 of Married Love. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elizabeth Klett. Married Love by Mari Stopes. Section 2. Author's Preface. More than ever today are happy homes needed. It is my hope that this book may serve the state by adding to their numbers. Its object is to increase the joys of marriage and to show how much sorrow may be avoided. The only secure basis for a present-day state is the welding of its units in marriage. But there is rottenness and danger at the foundations of the state if many of the marriages are unhappy. Today, particularly in the middle classes in this country, marriage is far less really happy than its surface appears. Too many who marry expecting joy are bitterly disappointed, and the demand for freedom grows, while those who cry aloud are generally unaware that it is more likely to have been their own ignorance than the marriage bond which was the origin of their unhappiness. It is never easy to make marriage a lovely thing, and it is an achievement beyond the powers of the selfish or the mentally cowardly. Knowledge is needed, and as things are at present, knowledge is almost unobtainable by those who are most in want of it. The problems of the sex life are infinitely complex, and for their solution urgently demand both sympathy and scientific research. I have some things to say about sex, which, so far as I am aware, have not yet been said, things which seem to be of profound importance to men and women who hope to make their marriages beautiful. This little book is less a record of a research than an attempt to present in easily understandable form the clarified and crystallized results of long and complex investigations. Its simple statements are based on a very large number of first-hand observations, on confidences from men and women of all classes and types, and on facts gleaned from wide reading. My original contributions to the age-long problems of marriage will principally be found in chapters 4, 5, and 8. The other chapters fill in what I hope is an undistorted picture of the potential beauties and realities of marriage. The whole is written simply, and for the ordinary untrained reader, though it embodies some observations which will be new even to those who have made scientific researches on the subjects of sex and human physiology. These observations I intend to supplement and publish at greater length and in more scientific language in another place. I do not now touch upon the many human variations and abnormalities which bulk so largely in most books on sex, nor do I deal with the many problems raised by incurably unhappy marriages. In the following pages I speak to those, and in spite of all our neurotic literature and plays, they are in the great majority, who are nearly normal, and who are married or about to be married, and hope, but do not know how, to make their marriages beautiful and happy. To the reticent as to the conventional, it may seem a presumption or a superfluity to speak of the details of the most complex of all our functions. They ask, is not instinct enough? The answer is no. Instinct is not enough. In every other human activity, it has been realized that training, the handing on of tradition, are essential. As Dr. Saleeby once wisely pointed out, a cat knows how to manage her newborn kittens, how to bring them up and teach them. A human mother does not know how to manage her baby unless she is trained, either directly or by her own quick observation of other mothers. A cat performs her simple duties by instinct. A human mother has to be trained to fulfill her very complex one. The same is true in the subtle realm of sex. In this country, in modern times, the old traditions, the profound, primitive knowledge of the needs of both sexes, have been lost, and nothing but a muffled confusion of individual gossip disturbs a silence, shamefaced or foul. Here and there in a family of fine tradition, a youth or maiden may learn some of the mysteries of marriage, but the great majority of people in our country have no glimmering of the supreme human art, the art of love, while in books on advanced physiology and medicine, the gaps, the omissions, and even the misstatements of bare fact are amazing. In my first marriage, I paid such a terrible price for sex ignorance that I feel that knowledge gained at such a cost should be placed at the service of humanity. In this little book, average, healthy, mating creatures will find the key to the happiness which should be the portion of each. It has already guided some to happiness, and I hope it may save some others years of heartache and blind questioning in the dark. Mari Carmichael Stopes. Letter from Father Stanislaus St. John, F.C., S.J., 114 Mount Street, London, W1. December 11, 1917. Dear Dr. Stopes, I have read Married Love with deep interest. As a piece of thoughtful scientific writing, I find it admirable throughout, and it seems to me that your theme could not have been treated in more beautiful or more delicate language, or with a truer ring of sympathy for those who, through ignorance or want of thought, make shipwreck of their married happiness. Your clear exposition of the rhythmic curve of sex feeling and of the misinterpretation on the part of so many husbands of what they call their wives' contrariness, arising from their ignorance of its existence, should bring happiness to many married couples whose lives are drifting apart through want of knowledge. In the exercise of my ministry, I have repeatedly traced the beginnings of the rift to this want of knowledge and consequently of sympathy. So far, we are in complete agreement, but our ways part when you treat of birth control. You write primarily as a scientist, though a very human scientist, and so you are naturally mainly occupied with the facts and conditions of what I may call our earth life. I, on the other hand, writing as a Catholic, regard our earth life as essentially and inseparably connected with an eternal existence which reaches out beyond the grave. I look on this life as utterly meaningless in itself, as a period which is simply and solely a means to an end, eternity, a period of which all the circumstances of pleasure and pain can only be explained and rightly used in their relation to this eternity. Let me take an illustration of my meaning the case you give of the worn-out mother of 12. The Catholic belief is that the loss of health on her part for a few years of life and the diminished vitality on the part of her later children would be a very small price indeed to pay for an endless happiness on the part of all. In our belief, then, the destruction of one spermatozoon is not the question, but the deliberate prevention of an eternally happy existence, which, in the supposition, might arise from its preservation. Holding as we do that the Marriage Act is the divinely ordained means by which man offers to God the opportunity of creating an immortal being, we do not believe that he may make use of this means and deliberately frustrate it of its end without doing grave wrong. You do me the honor of suggesting that I should write a foreword to your book, but any foreword from me could obviously only derive value from my position as a Catholic priest, and that position is in opposition to this part of your work. I cannot end without thanking you very sincerely for allowing me to read your book. Apart from what, as a Catholic, I object to in it, it contains so much most helpful matter that I feel sure it will bring to many a happiness in married life now wanting through the ignorance and the consequent want of sympathy which you so rightly deplore. Believe me, Dr. Stopes, yours very sincerely, S. St. John, S.J., C.F. I publish this letter with sincere thanks to Father St. John for his permission to use it. M.C.S. Reply to Father St. John, S.J. Leatherhead, December 12, 1917. Dear Father St. John, your letter wins my heart entirely by its appreciation and kindness. It is a great help and encouragement to find that we are so far in essential agreement and that you are so well disposed toward even part of my effort. But, and I wish I could say it in burning words, it is not because I am chiefly concerned with time that I wrote Chapter 9, but just because I am so acutely and so persistently conscious that I am dealing with factors of eternity. To me, today is essentially a part of my life everlasting. I cannot separate time and eternity, this world and the next, as religious people often seem able to do. To me, this body is a tool in the service of, though not completely in the control of, my immortal soul. Now it seems to me that religious people, and even in your letter I fancy I detect the same tendency, forgive me if I am wrong, are too ready to separate this world and the next, to act unreasonably or cruelly here, and to trust to eternity, or the hereafter, to put all right. I do not think that this is the way God wills us to work out his plans now that he is giving us the knowledge to do better. Could there be anything more unreasonable or cruel than to bring into life half a dozen children doomed from birth to ill health, poverty, and almost inevitable crime? Christ forgave the thief upon the cross, but he said, "Woe unto him through whom offenses come. It were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and he cast into the sea." Would Christ approve of deliberately creating a thief by bringing forth a child who was won inevitably through predictable weakness of physique and mentality and an environment of poverty? Thief stands for criminals in general. But more, what about others, born dead, born imbecile, thwarted of life by miscarriage, which tear and rend the overburdened mother so that she is forced to neglect the children she has, and her neglect turns them into thieves? The poor uneducated mother commits this crime through ignorance. It is we who know and allow her to remain in ignorance who are really responsible. Is not our withholding God-given knowledge the greatest stumbling block of offense to these little ones? And shall we not deserve the millstone round our necks? Were everyone to have all the children physiologically possible, now that infant mortality is so much reduced by science, in a few centuries there would not be standing room on the earth, and nowhere for a blade of grass or an ear of corn to grow between the crowding feet. Is then a Roman Catholic mother, the increases to whose large family get punier and punier, to be privileged to go deliberately with that host of puny children at the expense of others, not only through that part of eternity called time, but through all eternity? But, dear Father St. John, it is not my place to preach or to argue with you, especially after your generous kindness and appreciation. And alas, I fully realize that even were I granted the tongues of men and of angels, and I converted you to my thought in this matter, You, as a Roman Catholic priest, could not uphold a position in opposition to your church. Oh, that the churches would look to Christ's own words instead of to the official church interpretation of them. I thank you very sincerely for your kindness to a stranger, and remain always yours respectfully, Mari Carmichael Stopes. Section 3 of Married Love. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Elizabeth Klett. Married Love by Mari Stopes. Chapter 1. The Heart's Desire. She gave him comprehension of the meaning of love, a word in many mouths, not often explained. With her, wound in his idea of her, he perceived it to signify a new start in our existence, a finer shoot of the tree stoutly planted in good gross earth, the senses running their live sap, and the minds companioned, and the spirits made one by the whole-natured conjunction. In sooth, a happy prospect for the sons and daughters of earth, divinely indicating more than happiness, the speeding of us, compact of what we are, between the ascetic rocks and the sensual whirlpools, to the creation of certain nobler races, now very dimly imagined. George Meredith's Diana of the Crossways, Chapter 37. Every heart desires a mate. For some reason beyond our comprehension, nature has so created us that we are incomplete in ourselves. Neither man nor woman singly can know the joy of the performance of all the human functions. Neither man nor woman singly can create another human being. This fact, which is expressed in our outward divergencies of form, influences and colors the whole of our lives, and there is nothing for which the innermost spirit of one and all so yearns as for a sense of union with another soul, and the perfecting of oneself which such union brings. In all young people, unless they have inherited depraved or diseased faculties, the old desire of our race springs up afresh in its pristine beauty. With the dreams and bodily changes of adolescence come to the youth and maiden the strange and powerful impulses of the racial instinct. The bodily differences of the two, now accentuated, become mystical, alluring, enchanting in their promise. Their differences unite and hold together the man and the woman, so that their bodily union is the solid nucleus of an immense fabric of interwoven strands reaching to the uttermost ends of the earth, some lighter than the filmiest cobweb, or than the softest wave of music, iridescent with the colors not only of the visible rainbow, but of all the invisible glories of the wavelengths of the soul. However much he may conceal it under assumed cynicism, worldliness, or self-seeking, the heart of every young man yearns with a great longing for the fulfillment of the beautiful dream of a lifelong union with a mate. Each heart knows instinctively that it is only a mate who can give full comprehension of all the potential greatness in the soul, and have tender laughter for all the childlike wonder that lingers so enchantingly even in the white-haired. The search for a mate is a quest for an understanding heart, clothed in a body beautiful, but unlike our own. In the modern world, those who set out on high endeavors, or who consciously separate themselves from the ordinary course of social life, are comparatively few, and it is not to them that I am speaking. The great majority of our citizens, both men and women, after a time of waiting, or of exploring, or of oscillating from one attraction to another, settle down and marry. Very few are actually so cynical as to marry without the hope of happiness, while most young people, however their words may deny it, and however they may conceal their tender hopes by an assumption of cynicism, reveal that they are conscious of entering on a new and glorious state by their radiant looks and the joyous buoyancy of their actions. In the kisses and the hand-touch of the betrothed are a zest and exhilaration which stir the blood like wine. The two read poetry, listen entranced to music which echoes the songs of their pulses, and see reflected in each other's eyes the beauty of the world. In the midst of this celestial intoxication, they naturally assume that, as they are on the threshold of their lives, so too they are in but the antechamber of their experience of spiritual unity. The more sensitive, the more romantic, and the more idealistic is the young person of either sex, the more his or her soul craves for some kindred soul with whom the whole being can unite. But all have some measure of this desire, even the most prosaic, and we know from innumerable stories of real life that the sternest man of affairs, he who may have worldly success of every sort, may yet, through the lack of a real mate, live with a sense almost as though the limbs of his soul had been amputated. Edward Carpenter has beautifully voiced this longing. That there should exist one other person in the world towards whom all openness of interchange should establish itself, from whom there should be no concealment, whose body should be as dear to one in every part as one's own, with whom there should be no sense of mine or thine in property or possession, into whose mind one's thoughts should naturally flow, as it were to know themselves and to receive a new illumination, and between whom and oneself there should be a spontaneous rebound of sympathy in all the joys and sorrows and experiences of life. Such is perhaps one of the dearest wishes of the soul. From Love's Coming of Age. It may chance that someone into whose hands this book falls may protest that he or she has never felt the fundamental yearning to form part of that trinity which alone is the perfect expression of humanity. If that is so, it is possible that all unconsciously he may be suffering from a real malady, sex anesthesia. This is the name given to an inherent coldness, which, while it lacks the usual human impulse of tenderness, is generally quite unconscious of its lack. It may even be that the reader's departure from the ordinary ranks of mankind is still more fundamental, in which case, instead of sitting in judgment on the majority, he will do well to read some such book as The Sexual Question, English translation 1908, by the famous Professor Auguste Forel, in order that his own nature may be made known to him. He may then discover to which type of our widely various humanity he belongs. He need not read my book, for it is written about, and it is written for, ordinary men and women who, feeling themselves incomplete, yearn for a union that will have the power not to only make a fuller and richer thing of their own lives, but which will place them in a position to use their sacred trust as creators of lives to come. It has happened many times in human history that individuals have not only been able to conquer this natural craving for a mate, but have set up celibacy as a higher ideal. In its most beautiful expression and sublimest manifestations, the celibate ideal has proclaimed worldwide love in place of the narrower human love of home and children. Many saints and sages, reformers and dogmatists have modeled their lives on this ideal. But such individuals cannot be taken as the standard of the race, for they are out of its main current. They are branches which may flower, but never fruit in a bodily form. In this world our spirits not only permeate matter, but find their only expression through its medium. So long as we are human, we must have bodies, and bodies obey chemical and physiological as well as spiritual laws. If our race as a whole set out to pursue an ideal which must ultimately eliminate bodies altogether, it is clear that very soon we should find the conditions of our environment so altered that we can no longer speak of the human race. In the meantime, we are human. We each and all live our lives according to laws, some of which we have begun to understand, many of which are completely hidden from us. The most complete human being is he or she who consciously or unconsciously obeys the profound physical laws of our being in such a way that the spirit receives as much help and as little hindrance from the body as possible. A mind and spirit finds its fullest expression thwarted by the misuse, neglect, or gross abuse of the body in which it dwells. By the ignorant or self-indulgent breaking of fundamental laws, endless harmonies are dislocated. The modern, small-minded ascetic endeavors to grow spiritually by destroying his physical instincts instead of by using them. But I would proclaim that we are set in the world so to mold matter that it may express our spirits, that it is presumption to profess to fight the immemorial laws of our physical being, and that he who does so loses unconsciously the finest flux in which wondrous new creations take their rise. To use a homely simile, one might compare two human beings to two bodies charged with electricity of different potentials. Isolated from each other, the electric forces within them are invisible, but if they come into the right juxtaposition, the force is transmuted, and a spark, a glow of burning light arises between them. Such is love. From the body of the loved one's simple, sweetly colored flesh, which our immemorial creature instincts urge us to desire, there springs not only the wonder of a new bodily life, but also the enlargement of the horizon of human sympathy, and the glow of spiritual understanding which a solitary soul could never have attained alone. Many reading this may feel conscious that they have had physical union without such spiritual results, perhaps even without an accession of ordinary happiness. If that is so, it can only be because, consciously or unconsciously, they have broken some of the profound laws which govern the love of man and woman. Only by learning to hold a bow correctly can one draw music from a violin. Only by obedience to the laws of the lower plane can one step up to the plane above. End of Section 3.
Section 4 of Married Love. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Esther. Married Love by Marie Stoops. Section 4, Chapter 2. The Broken Joy. What shall be done to quiet the heart cry of the world? How answer the dumb appeal for help we so often divine below eyes that laugh? A.E. in The Hero in Man. Dreaming of happiness, feeling that at last they have each found the one who will give eternal understanding and tenderness, the young man and maiden marry. Note: in this and in most of the generalizations found in this book, I am speaking of things as they are in Great Britain, while to a considerable extent the same is true of America and the Scandinavian countries. It must be remembered all through that I am speaking of the British and primarily of our educated classes. At first, in the time generally called the honeymoon, the unaccustomed freedom and the sweetness of the relationship often does bring real happiness. How long does it last? Too often a far shorter time than is generally acknowledged. In the first joy of their union, it is hidden from the two young people that they know little or nothing about the fundamental laws of each other's being. Much of the sex attraction, not only among human beings but even throughout the whole world of living creatures, depends upon the differences between the two that pair, and probably, taking them all unawares, those very differences which drew them together now begin to work their undoing. But so long as the first illusion, that each understands the other, is supported by the thrilling delights of ever-fresh discoveries, the sensations lived through are so rapid and so joyous that the lovers do not realize that there is no firm foundation of real mutual knowledge beneath their feet. While even the happiest pair may know of divergencies about religion, politics, social custom, and opinions on things in general, these, with goodwill, patience, and intelligence on either side, can be ultimately adjusted, because in all such things there is a common meeting ground for the two. Human beings, while differing widely about every conceivable subject in human relations, have at least thought about them, threshed them out, and discussed them openly for generations. But about the much more fundamental and vital problems of sex, there is a lack of knowledge so abysmal and so universal that its mists and shadowy darkness have affected even the few who lead us, and who are prosecuting research in these subjects. And the two young people begin to suffer from fundamental divergencies before perhaps they realize that such exist, and with little prospect of ever gaining a rational explanation of them. Nearly all those whose own happiness seems to be dimmed or broken count themselves exceptions, and comfort themselves with the thought of some of their friends who they feel sure have attained the happiness which they themselves have missed. It is generally supposed that happy people, like happy nations, have no history. They are silent about their own affairs. Those who talk about their marriage are generally those who have missed the happiness they expected. True as this may be in general, it is not permanently and profoundly true, and there are people who are reckoned, and still reckon themselves, happy, but who yet unawares reveal the secret disappointment which clouds their inward peace. Leaving out of account femme incomprises, and all the innumerable neurotic, supersensitive, and slightly abnormal people, it still remains an astonishing and tragic fact that so large a population of marriages lose their early bloom and are to some extent unhappy. For years, many men and women have confided to me the secrets of their lives, and of all the innumerable marriages of which the inner circumstances are known to me, there are tragically few which approach even humanly attainable joy. Many of those considered by the world, by the relatives, even by the loved and loving partner, to be perfectly happy marriages, are secretly shadowed to the more sensitive of the pair. Where the bride is, as are so many of our educated girls, composed of virgin sweetness shut in ignorance, the man is often the first to create the rift within the lute. But his suffering begins almost simultaneously with hers. The surface freedom of our women has not materially altered, cannot materially alter, the pristine purity of a girl of our northern race. She generally has not even the capacity to imagine the basic facts of physical marriage, and her bridegroom may shock her without knowing that he was doing so. Then, unconscious of the nature, and even perhaps of the existence of his fault, he is bewildered and pained by her inarticulate pain. Yet I think, nevertheless, it is true that in the early days of marriage, the young man is often even more sensitive, more romantic, more easily pained about all ordinary things, and he enters marriage hoping for an even higher degree of spiritual and bodily unity than does the girl or the woman. But the man is more quickly blunted, more swiftly rendered cynical, and is readier to look upon happiness as a utopian dream than is his mate. On the other hand, the woman is slower to realize disappointment, and more often, by the sex life of marriage, is of the two the more profoundly wounded, with a slow corrosive wound that eats into her very being. Perfect happiness is a unity composed of a myriad essences, and this one supreme thing is exposed to the attacks of countless destructive factors. Were I to touch upon all the possible sources of marital disappointment and unhappiness, this book would expand into a dozen bulky volumes. As I am addressing those who I assume have read or can read other books written upon various ramifications of the subject, I will not discuss the themes which have been handled by many writers, nor deal with abnormalities which fill so large a part of most books on sex. In the last few years, there has been such an awakening to the realization of the corrosive horror of all aspects of prostitution that there is no need to labor the point that no marriage can be happy where the husband has, in buying another body, sold his own health with his honor, and is tainted with disease. Nor is it necessary, in speaking to well-meaning, optimistic young couples, to enlarge upon the obvious dangers of drunkenness, self-indulgence, and the cruder forms of selfishness. It is with the subtler infringements of the fundamental laws we have to deal, and the prime tragedy is that, as a rule, the two young people are both unaware of the existence of such decrees. Yet here, as elsewhere in nature, the lawbreaker is punished, whether he is aware of the existence of the law he breaks or not. In the state of ignorance which so largely predominates today, the first sign that things are amiss between the two who thought they were entering paradise together is generally a sense of loneliness, a feeling that the one who was expected to have all in common is outside some experience and some subtle delight, and fails to understand the needs of the loved one. Trivialities are often the first indicators of something which takes its roots unseen in the profoundest depths. The girl may sob for hours over something so trifling that she cannot even put into words its nature, while the young man, thinking that he had set out with his soul's beloved, upon an adventure into celestial distances, may find himself, apparently, up against a barrier in her which appears as incomprehensible as it is frivolous. Then, so strange is the mystical interrelation between our bodies, our minds, and our souls, that for crimes committed in ignorance of the dual functions of the married pair, and the laws which harmonize them, the punishments are reaped on planes quite diverse, till new and ever new misunderstandings appear to spring spontaneously from the soil of their mutual contact. Gradually or swiftly, each heart begins to hide a sense of boundless isolation. It may be urged that this statement is too sweeping. It is, however, based on innumerable actual lives. I have heard from women whose marriages are looked upon by all as the happiest possible expressions of human felicity, the details of secret pain of which they have allowed their husbands no inkling. Many men will know how they have hidden from their beloved wives a sense of dull disappointment, perhaps at her coldness in the marital embrace, or from the sense that there is in her something elusive which always evades their grasp. This profound sense of misunderstanding finds readier expression in the cruder and more ordinary natures. The disappointment of the married is expressed not only in innumerable books and plays, but even in comic papers and all our daily gossip. Now that so many movements are abroad, folks on all sides are emboldened to express the opinion that it is marriage itself which is at fault. Many think that merely by loosening the bonds and making it possible to start afresh with someone else, their lives would be made harmonious and happy. But often such reformers forget that he or she knows nothing of the way to make marriage great and beautiful with one partner. It is not likely to succeed with another. Only by a reverent study of the art of love can the beauty of its expression be realized in linked lives. And even when once learnt, the art of love takes time to practice. As Ellen Key says, quote, "Love requires peace. Love will dream. It cannot live upon remnants of our time and our personality." End quote. There is no doubt that love loses, in the haste and bustle of the modern turmoil, not only its charm and graces, but some of its vital essence. The evil results of the haste which so infests and poisons us are often felt much more by the woman than by the man. The overstimulation of city life tends to speed up the man's reactions, but to retard hers. To make matters worse, even for those who have leisure to spend on lovemaking, the opportunities for peaceful, romantic dalliance are less today in a city with its tubes and cinema shows than in the woods and gardens, where the pulling of the rosemary or lavender may be the sweet excuse for the slow and profound mutual rousing of passion. Now physical passion, so swiftly stimulated in men, tends to override all else, and the untutored man seeks but one thing, the accomplishment of desire. The woman, for it is in her nature so to do, forgives the crudeness, but sooner or later her love revolts, probably in secret, and then, forever after, though she may command an outward tenderness, she has nothing within but scorn and loathing for the act which should have been a perpetually recurring entrancement. End note. So many people are now born and bred in artificial and false surroundings that even the elementary fact that the acts of love should be joyous is unknown to them. A distinguished American doctor made this amazing statement, quote, "I do not believe mutual pleasure in the sexual act has any particular bearing on the happiness of life." American Medical Association, Rep. 1900.
Section 5 of Married Love. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Married Love by Marie Stopes. Section 5, Chapter 3, Women's Contrariness. Oh, for that being whom I can conceive to be in the world, though I shall not live to prove it, one to whom I might have recourse in all my humours and dispositions, in all my distempers of mind, visionary causes of mortification, and fairy dreams of pleasure. I have been trying to train up a lady or two for these good offices of friendship, but hitherto I must not boast of my success. Herrick. What is the fate of the average man who marries, happily and hopefully, a girl well suited to him? He desires with his whole heart a mutual, lifelong happiness. He marries with the intention of fulfilling every injunction given him by father, doctor, and friend. He is considerate in trifles. He speaks no harsh words. He and his bride go about together, walk together, read together, and perhaps, if they are very advanced, even work together. But after a few months, or maybe a few years of marriage, they seem to have drifted apart, and he finds her often cold and incomprehensible. Few men will acknowledge this, even to their best friends, but each heart knows its own pain. He may at times laugh, and in the friendliest spirit tease his wife about her contrariness. That is taken by everyone to mean nothing but a playful concealment of his profound love. Probably it is, but gnawing at the very roots of his love is a hateful little worm, the sense that she is contrary. He feels that she is at times inexplicably cold, that sometimes when he has done nothing, she will have tears in her eyes, irrational tears which she cannot explain. He observes that one week his tender love-making and romantic advances win her to smiles and joyous yielding, and then, perhaps a few days later, the same or more impassioned tenderness on his part is met by coldness or a forced appearance of warmth, which, while he may make no comment upon it, hurts him acutely. And this deep, inexplicable hurt is often the beginning of the end of his love. Men like to feel that they understand their dearest one, and that she is a rational being. After inexplicable misunderstanding has continued for some time, if the man is of at all a jealous nature, he will search his wife's acquaintances for someone whom she may have met, for someone who may momentarily have diverted her attention. For however hard it is for the natural man to believe that anyone could step into his shoes, some are ready to seek the explanation of their own ill success in a rival. On some occasion, when her coldness puzzles him, the man is perhaps conscious that his love, his own desires, are as ardent as they were a few days before. Then, knowing so intimately his own heart, he is sure of the steadiness of its love, and he feels acutely the romantic passion to which her beauty stirs him. He remembers perhaps that a few days earlier his ardor had awakened a response in her. Therefore, he reaches what appears to him to be the infallible logical deduction, that either there must be some rival, or his bride's nature is incomprehensible, contrary, capricious. Both thoughts to madden. With capriciousness, man in general has little patience. Caprice renders his best efforts null and void. Women's caprice is, or appears to be, a negation of reason, and as reason is man's most precious and hard-won faculty, the one which has raised mankind from the ranks of the brute creation, he cannot bear to see it apparently flouted. That his bride should lack logic and sweet reasonableness is a flaw it hurts him to recognize in her. He has to crush the thought down. It may then happen that the young man, himself pained and bewildered at having pained his bride by the very ardor of his affection, may strive to please her by placing restraint upon himself. He may ask himself, "Do not religious and many kinds of moral teachers preach restraint to the man?" He reads the books written for the guidance of youth, and finds restraint, self-control, in general terms, and often irrationally urged in them all. His next step may then be to curtail the expression of his tender feelings, and to work hard and late in the evenings, instead of kissing his bride's fingers, and coming to her for sweet communion in the dusk. And then, if he is at all observant, he may be aggrieved and astonished to find her again wistful or hurt. With the tender longing to understand, which is so profound a characteristic in all the best of our young men, he begs, implores, or pets her into telling him some part of the reason for her fresh grievance. He discovered to his amazement that this time she is hurt because he had not made those very advances which so recently had repelled her, and had been with such difficulty repressed by his intellectual efforts. He asks himself in despair, what is a man to do? If he is educated, he probably devours all the books on sex he can obtain, but in them he is not likely to find much real guidance. He learns from them that restraint is advised from every point of view, but according to the character of the author, he will find that restraint means having the marriage relations with his wife not more than 3 times a week, or once a month, or never at all except for the procreation of children. He finds no rational guidance based on natural law. According to his temperament, then, he may begin to practice restraint. But it may happen, and indeed it has probably happened, in every marriage once or many times, that the night comes when the man who has heroically practiced restraint accidentally discovers his wife in tears on her solitary pillow. He seeks for advice indirectly from his friends, perhaps from his doctor. But can his local doctor or his friends tell him more than the chief European authorities on this subject? The famous Professor Forel, The Sexual Question, translated 1908, gives the following advice. The reformer Luther, who was a practical man, laid down the average rule of 2 or 3 connections a week in marriage, at the time of highest sexual power. I may say that my numerous observations as a physician have generally confirmed this rule, which seems to me to conform very well to the normal state to which man has become gradually adapted during thousands of years. Husbands who would consider this average as an inscriptable right would, however, make wrong pretensions, for it is quite possible for a normal man to contain himself much longer, and it is his duty to do so, and not only when his wife is ill, but also during menstruation and pregnancy. Footnote. This pronouncement of an exceptionally advanced and broad-minded thinker serves to show how little attention has hitherto been paid to the woman's side of this question, or to ascertaining her natural requirements. End of footnote. Many men will not be so considerate as to follow this advice, which represents a high standard of living. But on the other hand, there are many who are willing to go not only so far, but further than this in their self-suppression, in order to attain their heart's desire, the happiness of their mate, and consequently their own life's joy. However willing they may be to go further, the great question for the man is, where? There are innumerable leaders anxious to lead in many different directions. The young husband may try first one and then the other, and still find his wife unsatisfied, incomprehensible, capricious. Then it may be that, disheartened, he tires, and she sinks into the dull apathy of acquiescence in her wifely duty. He is left with an echo of resentment in his heart. If only she had not been so capricious, they would still have been happy, he fancies. Many writers, novelists, poets, and dramatists have represented the uttermost tragedy of human life as due to the incomprehensible contrariness of the feminine nature. The kindly ones smile, perhaps a little patronizingly, and tell us that women are more instinctive, more childlike, less reasonable than men. The bitter ones sneer or reproach or laugh at this in women they do not understand, and which, baffling their intellect, appears to them to be irrational folly. It seems strange that those who search for natural law in every province of our universe should have neglected the most vital subject, the one which concerns us all infinitely more than the naming of planets or the collecting of insects. Woman is not essentially capricious. Some of the laws of her being might have been discovered long ago, had the existence of law been suspected. But it has suited the general structure of society much better for men to shrug their shoulders and smile at women as irrational and capricious creatures, to be courted when it suited them, not to be studied. Vaguely, perhaps, men have realized that much of the charm of life lies in the sex differences between men and women, so they've snatched at the easy theory that women differ from themselves by being capricious. Moreover, by attributing to mere caprice the coldness which at times comes over the most ardent woman, man was unconsciously justifying himself for at any time coercing her to suit himself. Circumstances have so contrived that hitherto the explorers and scientific investigators, the historians and statisticians, the poets and artists, have been mainly men. Consequently, woman's side of the joint life has found little or no expression. Woman has been content to mold herself to the shape desired by man wherever possible, and she has stifled her natural feelings and her own deep thoughts as they welled up. Most women have never realized intellectually, but many have been dimly half-conscious that woman's nature is set to rhythms over which man has no more control than he has over the tides of the sea. While the ocean can subdue and dominate man and laugh at his attempted restrictions, woman has bowed to man's desire over her body, and regardless of its pulses, he approaches her or not, as is his will. Some of her rhythms defy him. The moon-month tide of menstruation, the cycle of 10 moon months of bearing the growing child, and its birth at the end of the 10th wave. These are essentials too strong to be mastered by man. But the subtler ebb and flow of woman's sex has escaped man's observation or his care. If a swimmer comes to a sandy beach when the tide is out and the waves have receded, leaving sand where he had expected deep blue water, does he, balked of his babe, angrily call the sea capricious? But the tenderest bridegroom finds only caprice in his bride's coldness when she yields her sacrificial body while her sex tide is at the ebb. There is another side to this problem, one perhaps even less considered by society. There is the tragic figure of the loving woman whose love tide is at the highest and whose husband does not recognize the delicate signs of her ardor. In our anemic, artificial days, it often happens that the man's desire is a surface need, quickly satisfied, colorless and lacking beauty, and that he has no knowledge of the rich complexities of love-making which an initiate of love's mysteries enjoys. To such a man, his wife may indeed seem petulant, capricious, or resentful without reason. Welling up in her are the wonderful tides, scented and enriched by the myriad experiences of the human race, from its ancient days of leisure and flower-wreathed love-making, urging her to transports and to self-expressions, were the man but ready to take the first step in the initiative, or to recognize and welcome it in her. Seldom dare any woman, still more seldom dare a wife, risk the blow at her heart which would be given were she to offer charming love-play to which the man did not respond. To the initiate, she will be able to reveal that the tide is up by 100 subtle signs, upon which he will seize with delight. But if her husband is blind to them, there is for her nothing but silence, self-suppression, and their inevitable sequence of self-scorn, followed by resentment towards the man who places her in such a position of humiliation while talking of his love. So unaware of the elements of the physiological reactions of women are many modern men that the case of Mrs. G is not exceptional. Her husband was accustomed to pet her and have relations with her frequently, but yet he never took any trouble to rouse in her the necessary preliminary feeling for mutual union. She had married as a very ignorant girl, but often vaguely felt a sense of something lacking in her husband's love. Her husband had never kissed her except on the lips and cheek, but once at the crest of the wave of her sex tide, all unconscious that it was so, she felt a yearning to feel his head, his lips pressed against her bosom. The sensitive interrelation between a woman's breast and the rest of her sex life is not only a bodily thrill, but there is a world of poetic beauty in the longing of a loving woman for the unconceived child which melts in mists of tenderness toward her lover, the soft touch of whose lips can thus rouse her mingled joy. Because she shyly asked him, Mrs. G's husband gave her one swift, unrepeated kiss upon her bosom. He was so ignorant that he did not know that her husband's lips upon her breast melt a wife to tenderness, and are one of a husband's first and surest ways to make her physically ready for complete union. In this way, he inhibited her natural desire, and as he never did anything to stir it, she never had any physical pleasure in their relation. Such prudish or careless husbands, content with their own satisfaction, little know the pent-up aching or even resentment which may eat into a wife's heart, and ultimately may affect her whole health. Often the man is also the victim of the purblind social customs which have made sex knowledge taboo. It has become a tradition of our social life that the ignorance of woman about her own body and that of her future husband is a flower-like innocence. And to such an extreme is this sometimes pushed that not seldom is a girl married unaware that married life will bring her into physical relations with her husband fundamentally different from those with her brother. When she discovers the true nature of his body and learns the part she has to play as a wife, she may refuse utterly to agree to her husband's wishes. I know one pair of which the husband, chivalrous and loving, had to wait years before his bride recovered from the shock of the discovery of the meaning of marriage and was able to allow him a natural relation. There have been not a few brides whom the horror of the first night of marriage with a man less considerate has driven to suicide or insanity. That girls can reach a marriageable age without some knowledge of the realities of marriage would seem incredible were it not a fact. One highly educated lady intimately known to me told me that when she was about 18, She suffered many months of agonizing apprehension that she was about to have a baby because a man had snatched a kiss from her lips at a dance. When girls so brought up are married, it is a rape for the husband to insist on his marital rights at once. It will be difficult or impossible for such a bride ever after to experience the joys of sex union, for such a beginning must imprint upon her consciousness the view that the man's animal nature dominates him. In a magazine I came across a poem which vividly expresses this peculiarly feminine sorrow. To mate with men who have no soul above earth grubbing, who, the bridal night forsooth, killed sparks that rise from instinct fires of life, and left us frozen things, alone to fashion our souls to dust, masked with the name of wife. Long years of youth, love years, the years of passion yawning before us. So, shamming to the end, all shriveled by the side of him we wed, hoping that peace may riper years attend. Mere odalisks are we, well housed, well fed. Catherine Nelson. Many men who enter marriage sincerely and tenderly may yet have some previous experience of bought love. It is then not unlikely that they may fall into the error of explaining their wife's experiences in terms of the reactions of the prostitute. They argue that because the prostitute showed physical excitement and pleasure in union, if the bride or wife does not do so, then she is cold or undersexed. They may not realize that often all the bodily movements which the prostitute makes are studied and simulated because her client enjoys his climax best when the woman in his arms simultaneously thrills. As Forel says, The Sexual Question, 1908, English translation, the company of prostitutes often renders men incapable of understanding feminine psychology, for prostitutes are hardly more than automata trained for the use of male sensuality. When men look among these for the sexual psychology of woman, they find only their own mirror. Fate is often cruel to men, too. More high-spirited young men than the world imagines strive for and keep their purity to give their brides. If such a man then marries a woman who is soiled, or, on the other hand, one who is so pure and prudish that she denies him union with her body, his noble achievement seems bitterly vain. On the other hand, it may be that after years of fighting with his hot young blood, a man has given up and gone now and again for relief to prostitutes, and then, later in life, has met the woman who is his mate, and whom, after remorse for his soiled past, and after winning her forgiveness for it, he marries. Then, unwittingly, he may make the wife suffer, either by interpreting her in the light of the other women, or perhaps, though this happens less frequently, by setting her absolutely apart from them. I know of a man who, after a loose life, met a woman whom he reverenced and adored. He married her, but to preserve her purity, her difference from the others, he never consummated his marriage with her. She was strangely unhappy, for she loved him passionately and longed for children. She appeared to him to be pining capriciously when she became thin and neurotic. Perhaps this man might have seen his own behavior in a truer light, had he known that some creatures simply die if unmated. The idea that woman is lowered by sex intercourse is very deeply rooted in our present society. Many sources have contributed to this mistaken idea, not the least powerful being the ascetic ideal of the early church and the fact that man has used woman as his instrument so often, regardless of her wishes. Women's education, therefore, and the trend of social feeling, has largely been in the direction of freeing her from this and thus mistakenly encouraging the idea that sex life is a low, physical, and degrading necessity which a pure woman is above enjoying. In marriage, the husband has used his marital right of intercourse when he wished it. Footnote: Conjugal Rights, Notes and Queries, May 16, 1891, page 383. S. writes from the Probate Registry, Somerset House. Previous to 1733, legal proceedings were recorded in Latin, and the word then used, where we now speak of rights, was obsequies. For some time after the substitution of English for Latin, the term rights was usually, if not invariably, adopted. Rights would appear to be a comparatively modern error. Mr. T. E. Paget writes, Romeo and Juliet, Act 5, Scene 3, "What cursed foot wanders this way tonight, to cross my obsequies and true lover's right?" Well may Lord Esher say he has never been able to make out what the phrase conjugal rights means. The origin of the term is now clear, and a blunder, which was first made perhaps by a typesetter in the early part of the last century, and never exposed until now, has led to a vast amount of misapprehension. Here, too, is another proof that Shakespeare was exceedingly familiar with legal language. End of footnote. Both law and custom have strengthened the view that he has the right to approach his wife whenever he wishes, and that she has no wishes and no fundamental needs in the matter at all. That woman has a rhythmic sex tide, which, if its indications were obeyed, would ensure not only her enjoyment, but would explode the myth of her capriciousness, seems not to be suspected. We have studied the wavelengths of water, of sound, of light, but when will the sons and daughters of men study the sex tide in women, and learn the laws of her periodicity of recurrence of desire? End of section 5.